Today's guest on the podcast, it's a two-hander. It's the authors of a book called You Can Change Yourself. And the two authors are Peter Bregman and Howie Jacobson. And Peter is the founder and CEO of Bregman Partners. He is a globally recognized executive coach. He's the author of a number of books that have been enormously successful. And he's a regular keynote speaker and contributor to global magazines. Howie is also an executive coach and is director of coaching at Bregman Partners. He has worked with startups, some of Fortune 100 companies. He is the author and co-author of many different books on a variety of different subjects. And he also has the title of Chief Habit Nerd on his LinkedIn profile. So that will tell you a little bit about Howie. But they're both hugely successful in their own right. They worked together to create this book, You Can Change Other People. And it is a fantastic book. I must say, I would highly recommend it to anybody. We talked through, they've got creative process of how you can work through that, how you can help other people change and how you can change other people. And it is a very, very clear step-by-step process. We talk about emotional courage and we talk about the discipline, and we also talk about really focusing on the outcome. So I highly encourage you to listen to us. It's full of great tips, great strategies from both a professional and also from a personal perspective. And they are two fantastic communicators. So sit back and enjoy Peter Bregman and Howie Jacobson. Peter and Howie, thank you so much indeed for joining us here today. It's a real pleasure to have both of you here.
It's such a great pleasure to be with you, John. Thanks for having us.
Not at all. Can I just kind of jump straight? Because I want to talk about, focus on the book, because I know both of you are authors of many different books. But the most recent book, the two of you co-authors, You Can Change Other People. And if I can dive into that kind of straight away, because and you refer to it in the book as a truism that most people say, well, no, you can't change other people. You can only change yourself. But your book kind of starts off on the premise, no, that's not true. So maybe elaborate on that. Can you actually change other people?
100%. You know, it's a funny thing, this idea that you can't change other people, because every time someone tells you you can't change other people, you can only change yourself, they're trying to change you, right? They're trying to get you to stop. The reason they're telling you is because they see that you're going down what they consider to be a rabbit hole, right? And that they're trying to stop you from wasting your energy. So they're trying to change you. And it's not that, and I'm a coach, Howie's a coach. It's our job to change other people, right? And it's not that we can't change other people. It's that the things we do and say to try to change other people backfire. It creates the resistance rather than supports the change. People don't resist change. They resist being changed. So if we change people in a way that makes them feel like we're trying to take control, or we're criticizing them, or we're telling them what they're doing wrong, or we're telling them how we're better than them and we've got a better way, they are going to resist that. In that moment, then it would be true. If that's the way you try to change people, you can't change other people. But there are absolutely ways that are very, very successful to help and support people in the changes that they most want to make in their lives.
Howie, for you, I mean, you came to this realization. Was this a kind of the two of you got together and had this great aha moment?
Well, we've had lots of aha moments, but we started writing this as sort of a coaching manual. And at some point, like, you know, as we were talking about collaborating and what this might look like for a long time. And as we've been friends for 20 years, we also talk about our lives, our struggles, our families. And we kind of realized that, like, the same methodology we're so good at in a professional setting would be really helpful if we actually used it in our lives. Like, and we've trained coaches on this, like telling coaches, like, you already have the skills to be more helpful to your spouse, to your children, to your parents, to your friends, but we don't think of using it. And so, before we started recording, John, you said that you felt this was also not just a business book. And so I think kind of the aha that we came to is this is a methodology, a very simple process that anyone can use to enhance the lives of the people around them. And we started using it too. And it was like, boy, this kind of really works.
I want to come back because you've got a 4-step process that I want to maybe just talk through at a reasonably high level. But one of the things that you say, and you know how you mentioned there, I kind of came to it from started off kind of looking at this as a business book, because most of the work that I do is coaching senior executives and cross-functional teams. But just a quote which said, changing others is perhaps the most important capability that a leader can develop. I just thought that was really interesting. And I was trying to think, is that something that I've actually heard before? And I don't think that is something that I've heard put in that way, that changing others is one of the most important capability. Could you maybe elaborate on that, Howie, for us?
Sure. Well, you know, leaders all started out as typically as individual stars, as performers. And so, you know, you get rewarded by being great at what you do, by being promoted to positions of greater and greater, you know, sort of authority and control over larger systems, which means you have to get alignment, you have to get buy-in, you have to find the people around you who aren't aligned, who aren't doing things exactly the right way, who are getting in their own way. And if all you can do is be great yourself, at a certain point, you max out your effectiveness. So for someone in a leadership in an organization to say, okay, we're all going to go in this direction and we're all going to do it as best we can, that involves getting people aligned and getting people to up their games. So, you know, the leverage you get when you can help someone else become great is much larger than the leverage you get by just being great on your own.
Mm. Peter, from your perspective, I mean, you coach a lot of leaders. Is that something that people feel comfortable embracing, as that is something that they need to be in order to be an effective leader?
Yeah, you know, this might be an element of language, but there's no leader that I know who's successful who doesn't see their role as aligning a group of people and helping them move from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. And then looking at certain people on their team and saying, you know, this person, they're really strong there, but they're getting in their way there. And we got to help them to, like, you know, leverage their strengths and mitigate the negative consequences of their weaknesses. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a great leader creates an aligned, collaborative team that is willing to get better at what they're doing every day. And this becomes increasingly important when companies are growing. So there's a lot of organizations, it's a lot of leaders that we work with who are growing in a scaled company. So like I have a leader who's leading at $300 million, and then the company grows to 500 million, and they're kind of struggling. And it's 750 million, they're going to be out of their depth. And so that person, if you know, they're committed to the company, they're loyal to the team, they may or may not be able to grow along with the size of the company and change their skills to manage, you know, and to lead in that size of company. So if the leader is most effective, when that leader they may have to make a hard decision, which says this person can't make it, but first they want to do their best to help that person make it. So it's both critical in terms of day-to-day business. It's critical from a behavioral standpoint, as well as it is from an alignment standpoint. And it's really critical in terms of helping people you care about grow so that they don't become irrelevant in a scaling company.
Yeah. And in the book where you talk about the 4 steps, the 4 steps being, you know, the shift from critic to ally, identifying and energizing outcome, finding the hidden opportunity, and creating a level 10 plan. Maybe Howie, could I ask you to maybe just kind of give an overview of that, because I've just kind of stated what they are, but maybe just kind of put a bit more meat on the bones for that?
Yeah, sure. So this is where my media training will pay off. I could do it in less than 3 hours.
You can change other people.
Yeah. You can do this in a few minutes.
Thank goodness. Well, it remains to be seen. So the first step is to shift from critic to ally, which we're going to say that every step is the most important step, but this is really the most important step, because if you don't do this, then you're falling into the trap that Peter talked about earlier about trying to change people against their will. And even if someone wants to make a particular change, someone wants to improve their ability to run a meeting or their ability to eat healthy, if you come at them and tell them they have to do it, then they're going to resist because they're trying to protect their autonomy. And they're trying to resist any suggestions that will make them feel ashamed of themselves, like they're lesser than, that there's something wrong with them. So we want to come at them as a supportive ally. And that involves doing some work on ourselves. It involves paying attention to what's our positive intent. It involves thinking about, as generously as possible, the positive intent behind what they're doing, and then actually asking permission to engage in a conversation. And once they've said, yes, I want to think about this with you, then we can move to the other 3 steps. So step 2 is to identify an energizing outcome. And that's because, like, as soon as they give us permission, we just want to roll up our sleeves and go in and figure out solve the problem. But the problem is, first of all, it's a negative. It's a thing they're trying to get away from or avoid. They may still have some fight or flight anxiety about it. So we want to point them in the direction of, what do you want? What would an energizing outcome look like? What would be great? And once we have that, then we can go to step 3, which is look back at the situation, including the problem, and say, where are there opportunities to achieve that energizing outcome? It could be, the opportunity is to show some emotional courage every time the situation occurs. The opportunity could be, this problem is actually a symptom of a much larger systemic issue that if we fix that, we can prevent all sorts of more expensive, worse future problems. So once we have that opportunity, then we move to step 4, which is to guide them to create a plan that they're going to carry out, that as an experiment to see, is this going to achieve the energizing outcome? And we call it a level 10 plan, because we want them to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you're going to follow through? A 10. And it's important to say that the 10 is not how confident are you that it's going to work, but rather, are you willing to do this, to learn from it, to take your best shot, and to continue the process. So it becomes iterative. Okay, I tried this. Hey, some of it worked, some of it didn't. Great. Do you want to talk about it? What's your outcome you're looking for? And we can keep supporting people in this sort of spiraling process of learning and growth and success.
Yeah, that's great. Peter, can I ask you, because and how you just referred to it there, that step 1, which is shifting from critic to ally, right? It's one of these things that's kind of, it's very easy to say, but it's not so easy to do in that sense. So, because one is from your side, not being a critic, but trying to be an ally, but also from the other side of not being seen as a critic, but being seen as an ally. And they're both are different. What are the do's and don'ts when you do that? Because it's so hard to kind of not step over into that critic role, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And you said it beautifully, John, this idea that there's 2 sides of it, right? So the first side is to check in with yourself. Like, what's your intent? What do you want here? What's the outcome that you want? And also, where is it coming from? Like, oftentimes it comes out of a place of frustration or anger. But if you take a beat and you say, why am I frustrated or why am I angry? It's because you care, or because you love, or because you're scared, or there's some vulnerable emotion that's often much more connected to the person than, we almost never lash out in anger without really caring about something or someone. And so it's getting in touch with that intent. It's then being able to see their intent, at least hypothetically, meaning you don't have to be right, but you have to recognize that everybody acts in ways that seem reasonable from their perspective, right? So for the most part, no one's trying to be a jerk. Nobody's trying to be disruptive for the most part, right? And so I'm sure someone could give me an example of the opposite, but mostly people are acting in good faith in good ways, even if it's very frustrating. And so it's getting in touch with what you imagine their positive intent might be. Someone's talking over people in meetings and is very aggressive, and maybe their positive intent is they want to be heard. that they feel shut down and they feel like something's really important that the group is not addressing. And they want to put that on the table, and maybe they're doing it awkwardly, but that's their positive intent. And then the third a piece of this is what you said, which is not to turn them off, to indicate that you're an ally. And it's actually simple to do, but the reason you want to do that pre-work about your own intent and their intent is it has to be authentic, right? If you're doing this just to follow the directions we're giving you and it's fake and you don't feel it, they'll know in a second because people are smart. So it's a 3-step process, and it's empathize, express confidence, and ask permission, right? And the first is to empathize with them. So in the example I gave, to be able to go, hey, I could see what a struggle it is. Like I could see the conflict between you and the organization, and I could see that that's hard for you, and that there's things you want to say, and I could see that it's ending in frustration, and I know that's hard, and I have seen you be, that's the empathy piece. Now the confidence, I've seen you communicate incredibly successfully and incredibly powerfully at times, so I know that you can do this. And then the permission, which is, would you be willing to think about this with me? Would it be interesting for you to think about this with me? And here's what's key. If they say no, you have to accept it. If they say no, then okay, then no. It's up to them. It's their choice. I've done this, and the person said no to me. And then later that afternoon, they came back and they said, hey, I'd like to have that conversation with you. And the reason they did that was because I didn't push back on their no. It was really it's up to them. It's their choice. It's their ownership. That's what's really critical. People need to own these, changes if they're going to make them. And they knew that I was a resource. And when they came back to me with full confidence that I was an ally.
Yeah. So in the situation, I'm thinking particularly in a situation that is not necessarily a work scenario, right? Where it might be a family member or a friend who, and I think you say it in the book, where they actually think, what you're talking about is none of your damn business, right? You're trying to be an ally, you're trying to be supportive, but where they are is kind of, this is none of your business. What are you talking to me about this? How do you deal with that? Is that the permission piece?
Yeah. So first of all, the example I gave you beforehand, where they said no and then they said yes, was my daughter. So just to be clear, like that's a family member, and she said no. And that's an interesting situation, because that's a situation in which I could easily step into the conversation with an illusion of control and power. It's my daughter. I didn't say a daughter. I said my daughter, right? Like I get to make those choices. I get to say what you listen to and what you don't. Of course, we know that's absolutely ridiculous, right? It's an illusion of control. But if we, the strongest illusion of control that we often have is over our children, and it is truly an illusion of control. So I just wanted to be clear about that. And then the second is, you know what? It may be none of your business. Like they may be right, right? They might say it's none of your business. And then you can say, here's how I would respond to it. You're right. You're right. I respect that. I would love to help if I can, and it's none of my business. So if you think I could be helpful, I'm happy to, but otherwise I will never mention this again.
Okay.
Right? Because it's their call. It's their call. They need the ownership. Otherwise they're not going to change.
Yeah, I can, just as you were talking, I've got 3 daughters. I can remember numerous times where I fall into the trap of not asking for permission, just kind of barreling ahead. And most times it doesn't end well when you do that.
Yeah, and what's amazing? My daughter the other day, who was talking to me about something, and complaining about something, and I took that as an invitation to start giving her advice. Complaining is not an invitation to give advice. You still need permission. It's what we call a silver platter opportunity, but it's still. So I started to give her advice, and then I stopped, and I said, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm overstepping my bounds. Do you want my thoughts on this? Like, is this something you want to talk about? And by the way, had I not read my own book, I probably would not have interrupted my own behavior. I'm just saying that. So I said, and she paused for a second, and she said, thank you so much for asking. Like, I really appreciate you not just barreling in. And then she said, yeah. And listen to this language carefully. yeah, in this situation right now, I really would love your advice. She's not saying, yes, and I give you permission to barrel over me whenever you have advice for me.
Yes.
No, she's saying like, yeah, actually, I would love your advice right now. Thank you.
Yeah.
But she really appreciated that I asked her permission.
Yeah. But it wasn't carte blanche. You can do this anytime.
Yeah, it was not. It was like, yeah, I would like it now. And I don't take it as that. And by the way, oftentimes I'll be in a conversation with my wife and I'll say, so hold on. Like before I respond to what you've been talking about for the last 20 minutes, which Peter do you want? Like I could be the Peter who listens and doesn't give you any advice, and I could just be a listener and I'm fine. I have a few thoughts I could share with you, but I don't have to. Like you tell me whether you want me to just be a listener or whether you want me to give you advice. And I'll follow her lead. And by the way, it feels so much better as the giver of advice or the not giver of advice to be in a relationship where we're respectful of the other person and we ask their permission to engage in a way that would be helpful to them.
I will take your advice on that one, try it out and tell you how it goes.
Please do. Please do.
Howie, can I ask you just in terms of because we're talking about being an ally, but what you're also saying in the book is that, you've got to become your own best ally. So what does that entail? How do I become my own best ally?
Well, I mean, start with asking yourself what you want, right? So I'll say, what do I want to get out of the situation? And as Peter was talking about it, very, very rarely are we using this process transactionally. This is a process in which we're in relationship, in which there is a long game, right? So like, as similar to Peter, like I have two kids, they're 25 and 21. And I've been working on this book. What has it been, like a year and a half, 2 years that we've been grappling with these concepts daily. Since I have started putting it into my life, my kids are now asking me for advice, right? I got a text from my son this morning. The first 4 words are, "I want your advice."
Wow.
I can show you, I can share it. It's documented, which blows my mind. So to recognize like what's important to me here, and to be okay with that. So if I'm angry or frustrated or scared or something, I can become my own critic. Like, oh, I did it again. I butted in, right? So Peter could say, I was hard on my kids again. And I was, like we can get down on ourselves. So to apply the same process to ourselves, a process of self-compassion based on curiosity. What do I care about? What's important to me? And dig until you find something valid. Right? I care about my children's well-being. I care about my team's success. I care about this person's suffering. Oh, well, that's valid. That's good. And, I don't like how vulnerable that makes me feel. So I was covering it up with bravado, with male rage, with, cutting myself off emotionally, whatever I was doing. I could see why I did that. So now when I become my own ally, it immediately can start to flow over. Like I'm no different than you. I see you struggling. I see you doing things that I can't understand. Why are you doing that? And I've just done this practice on myself, which means I'm now predisposed to see us as the same. We're both human beings. And, when we're talking about our kids, like I think there's, Peter, our kids were babies. Like we had to tell them everything. We had to do everything for them. And it's such a beautiful and poignant process to make that shift because you never get it right? We're always overshooting one way or the other. And just to feel some generosity for how hard this is. And what a beautiful struggle it is to be a human being in relationship with other human beings. And from that place, there's just a lot of generosity and grace that we can offer each other.
I think that's lovely. One of the things that you talk about, and certainly, I mean, and you guys working in organizations would, come across this observation that, wanting people to take ownership of, the decisions they take or the commitments they make. And you talk about it in the book, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about how how we get people to really take ownership of whatever commitments, decisions that they make. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on that.
It's actually very simple. We give them choice. So once you make a choice, then you have ownership over it. If I'm not giving you a choice, it's going to be very, very difficult to have ownership. So what we need to do is find ways to create choices so that people have the freedom to control the parts of their lives that they want to. When we get to the plan stage, stage 4, it's really important that people are making their own choices about how to move forward. That we're not saying, okay, so this has been a great conversation. Now I need you to do these 3 things. That's not our role as the person supporting them and helping them change. Our role is in saying, like, all right, what are some options based on this whole conversation? What are some options? What are some things you want to try that might work, but at least you know that you're 100% confident you're going to follow through on? So it could be an experiment. We could see if it works. What do you want to try? And when are you going to want to try it? I might ask a lot of questions here, but it's most important that they have when you own something, you've chosen it. And that's what's really important.
And how do you stick with it? Because there is that moment where people say, yes, okay, I've decided, I'm going to lose weight or whatever, I'm going to go to the gym or whatever it might be. That's one part of it, but that's the start. How do you sustain it and get them to maintain that drive right through to the end?
Well, I don't try to get them to maintain a drive, right? Like that. First of all, that's their decision. And so something that Peter taught me years ago that I use all the time in my coaching is the distinction between motivation and follow through. So that we often think, and I work with a lot of people who are trying to change habits that are very ingrained. And they're very motivated to change these habits because they can clearly see how much better their lives will be if they have different habits. But in the moment, they will default to the old habit, especially under any kind of stress, right? Especially when they're tired, especially, any additional forces on them, they will just default to the old dysfunctional behavior. And then they will say, gosh, I wish I was motivated. I'm just not motivated. And they will spend hours bemoaning the fact that they're not motivated, which of course is a sign how motivated they are. They really want this. So what we do in the plan stage is we look for little small wins and specific moments. So to give you an example of someone who thinks, okay, I've got to get better at talking to my teammates. I've gotten a lot of 360 feedback that I'm aggressive, that I shut them down, that I belittle them. I don't mean to, I just try to get the best ideas out there. And now they're thinking like 24/7, I have to change myself completely. And what a drag. But instead we look at like, where's the moment? Where's the pivotal moment where you can either go direction A or direction B? And it plan for that moment and have all the resources at your hand available for that moment. So if you're going to do, you're going to be in that meeting, maybe do some breathing a few minutes beforehand. Like really be strategic about if you had to bet on yourself in that moment, what could you do to really pile the odds in your favor so that you're not relying on how much you want it, but instead you're following the plan and focusing on how do I orchestrate the follow through.
Okay, that's great. You talked and you mentioned earlier on, Peter, you mentioned it. I think we were talking there a few minutes ago. You talked about emotional courage, and I just love to hear what do you actually mean by emotional courage, and how do you build it?
So emotional courage is the willingness to feel things, right? Mm-hmm. And it's at the core of what Howie's just been talking about, which is follow through. The biggest problem that we face isn't that we're lacking knowledge or time or opportunity or skill. Like for most of us, for most things we want to do, we have plenty of knowledge, time, opportunity, and skill, right? That's not the problem. Think about anything that you want to do that you're not doing, right? I bet you know enough about it. You're perfectly skilled. You've had time and opportunity. So that's what we usually try to solve for, but that's not the actual problem. The problem is closing the gap between what we know and what we do, or what we're skilled enough to do and what we follow through on. And that gap is a gap of emotional courage, a willingness to feel. If you want to have a hard conversation with someone that you're not having, the reason you're not having it is because once you open your mouth, you're going to start to feel a lot of things. Even before you open your mouth, you're going to feel things. I might insult them. They might get angry at me. They might get defensive. They might come back at me. They might be passive aggressive. I might feel shame. They might feel shame. There's like a whole host of things. But if I don't have the conversation, then I don't have to feel any of those things. It's the same thing with eating, or it's actually, it's the same thing with holding back advice. So now we're having this conversation and we know, like, it's not good to just give advice unsolicited, right? Like, we all know that. Everybody listening to this knows that it's not a good idea to just give people advice unsolicited. Like, we all know that. In the moment, so you're perfectly skilled enough, right? You know that, and you certainly have time and opportunity to not give people advice, right? This is like a perfect example. It's going to take you less time to not give advice, right? Every opportunity that someone does something that annoys you is a great opportunity to not give advice. And you're going to have that opportunity somewhere in the next 30 minutes. And the skill of not giving advice is to just not talk, right? It's not a difficult skill, right? So you're perfectly skilled to not give advice. And yet, in the moment, someone says something and it will be very, very hard for you to give advice. Why? Because you're going to feel this urge. You want to help, or you want to point something out, or you want to criticize, or there's going to be this you want to set things right, or you want to convey the truth of life. Like, whatever it is, like, it is going to be this drive to give advice. Emotional courage is the willingness to feel all of those things and not act on them, right? Emotional courage is the willingness to feel the desire to fix, to drive, to inform someone, to enlighten them, to change the world in this moment through this one misguided person. And in that moment, right, not doing that, resisting the urge to intervene in a way that we are now telling you will be unproductive anyway, the ability to resist that is a challenge of emotional courage. It's a willingness to feel all of those things and smile and not do anything in that moment. That requires tremendous willingness to feel.
Wow. That does take tremendous courage to feel all of that and keep your mouth shut at the same time.
Yeah.
Is huge, isn't it? It is huge.
Right.
Before we wrap up, it's just interested to hear. I mean, the book is it's a great book, and I'm not saying that to be sycophantic with you, but simply there's great strategies, great tactics. It just gives you a great kind of how-to and great depth to that. But just to hear from the two of you, what was the one thing, if you were asked for, was the one thing that you want people to take from the book? Maybe one thing is a bit hard to actually bring it down to that. But what do you really want people? I'll ask you first, Howie. What do you want people when they read the book? What do you want them to walk away with?
I think for me, I think everyone has their own medicine. So there's a lot of medicine in there, and you kind of pick and choose. For me, the thing that made the biggest difference was learning Peter's discipline of always asking about the outcome. And it has made me such a freaking brilliant person. like it's amazing. Like I'll be in conversation with someone and they'll be discussing something. I'll say, what are you going for here? What's the outcome? And then all of a sudden it's like rainbows are coming out of their ears. They get excited. They sometimes solve their problem in that moment. Because I think, when we are focused on the problem, just physiologically in our brains, the part of our brain that's lit up when we're problem focused is the part of our brain that's trying to avoid pain, that's trying to run away from predators. It's not creative. It's not future focused. Right. So when we can just ask a question that gets people into their right mind, into the mind, the part of the brain that actually is designed to solve these kind of problems, magic happens. And it's such an easy thing to do. It doesn't take any skill whatsoever, except the willingness to try it. I would say for me, that was the biggest piece of medicine that I got from this process and from learning from Peter.
And it's such a powerful question, isn't it? I mean, it is really such a powerful, because so often when we are in the middle of the problem or the issue, we're stuck. And asking that question is just really helpful to get you unstuck and not focusing on the problem, but focusing on the outcome. Peter, for you, was it the same, or was it somewhat different, or a variation of?
I think the most important thing for me is, and I'm just riffing off of my whole riff on emotional courage, is follow a process. So like in the book, we offer a 4-step process. There's a reason that we offer it. I've been coaching for 30 years. This is a process that, along with Howie, we've developed and refined, and we know it really well. And so like, I'm Peter Bregman. I've, designed this process. And if I don't intentionally move through the process and say, I'm going to do this first, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do that, it is so likely that I will fall into my habits that are not as effective. Mm-hmm. So, I think the most important thing is to, like, we've designed this process. You could use another process. I don't really care what process you use, but don't leave yourself to your own devices when you are in a position when you're trying to help someone change, because it is way too likely and way too seductive to fall into habits that end up hurting them and hurting the relationship.
It is absolutely possible, 100% possible, to have a productive conversation with people where you help them up their game, where you help them get unstuck, where you help them stop self-sabotage and contribute to the organizations and the collectives that they're part of by first having the proper intent, and then following a process that's reliable, that makes sure that you don't get off track in hard moments.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a fantastic structure, and it's a fantastic structure just to kind of keep in your head, because it keeps you on track and stops you kind of drifting off into, and I think moving into more of the critic or other pitfalls that can be there. Before we wrap up, 2 questions that I ask everybody who comes on the show, and this I know is going to be asking you not to choose your own books, and I know both of you are authors of many, but books that have had an impact upon you and that you would recommend to our listeners. Howie, I start with you first.
Yeah, I've just started reading a new book called The Dawn of Everything. It's a book by an anthropologist and an archaeologist, and it's a stunning set of theories based on recent archaeological discoveries, and basically saying that there have been many cases throughout human history where humans have changed their forms of governments. They've changed how their civilizations and their societies run when they decide that what they're doing isn't working and they can do something better. And it kind of goes against the old philosophy that we were, noble savages, and then we ruined it with civilization, or that we were brutish savages and we need the state to rein in our worst impulses. Saying that the human history is this incredible kaleidoscope, and we get to choose. We get to be agents and choice agents of the kind of world we want to create. And it's really inspiring me, not just globally, but in just thinking like everything's up for grabs. We can create whatever world we want.
I love that. That's a new one for me. So that's why I love asking the question, because I come across great recommendations that I add to my own book list. Peter, for you?
It's funny because it is often whatever book I like is the book I'm reading or in the middle of right now, and I'm reading a book by Thich Nhat Hanh called Old Path, White Cloud, and it's sort of a book about the Buddha's life, and it's just a great book. Like I'm enjoying it. It's such a great model of change and living and life. And, you know, you can't think of somebody who's changed more people. It's, you know, he did something right.
Absolutely.
And I'm just really learning from it and enjoying the read. I feel like I'm a better person just by reading it.
Yeah, I love the material. Second question to ask everybody, and I was amused. The second is about daily rituals. And Howie, I must say, I was entertained when I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I see that one of the job titles you put on is Chief Habit Nerd on your LinkedIn profile. So daily rituals, do you have them? What are they? Are you happy to share them, and how do they serve you?
Well, I meditate twice a day ever since Peter told me to do that 2.5 years ago. Haven't missed a day since April 12th, 2019. And I also do some sort of cold water exposure every morning, either an ice bucket or a cold shower. And I'm sure there's great physiological benefits, but essentially it's the worst thing I do all day, and I get it out of the way quickly. So
How long do you meditate for? Just a matter of interest.
20 minutes twice a day.
20 minutes twice a day. And you do that absolutely every day. You haven't missed. That's very impressive, I have to say. Very, very impressive. Peter, for you?
So I do the same. Like I meditate twice a day, morning and afternoon. Somehow motivated by the fact that Howie listened to me when I suggested it, and now I can't not do it if he's doing it, right? So it's either supportive or codependence. I'm not sure which. And I also, like, I just realized I exercise every day. Like there's not a day that goes by when I don't do some kind of exercise. I have gotten to doing something recently that's been a very, very helpful ritual for me, which is sometime during the day, I stop for a few minutes and I do nothing. But by do nothing, I don't mean meditate. Like, because meditate even is doing something. So I just stop and I do nothing. I stare out the window. I let my mind wander. I literally do nothing. It's incredibly hard. It's much easier to do something. It's really, really hard to just do nothing. But I feel like, you know, there's all these people talk about gratitude journals and, you know, feeling good. I find that the thing that gets in the way of my feeling grateful is my constant motion. I just don't have time to feel grateful. And so when I stop and I do nothing for a moment, I get all these feelings that I didn't even know were there. And sometimes they're hard, but often they're delicious. And it's, I really am, you know, I'm sort of new to sort of focusing on this, but it's been a great ritual.
And how long would you stop for?
What's that? Oh,
how long?
Well, you know, it depends. You know, usually it's like, what I say is a few minutes, like 3, 4, 5 minutes. But sometimes I'm just sort of enjoying it and I don't really want to get to the next thing. And, you know, the alternative would be I'd find some way to give myself a break. And, you know, 2 pints of ice cream later, I would think I probably should have just done nothing, right? And so I'm finding that doing nothing is much more useful than what I would have done otherwise.
Fantastic.
So sometimes it's longer.
I love that. I love that. That's a new one. Peter and Howie, thank you so much indeed for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure. I highly recommend your book to anybody listening and to anybody who will engage in conversation with me over the next period of time, because I just really loved it. How can people get in touch with you, and where can they get the book? I know they can go to Amazon, etc., but how can they get in touch with you guys?
The best way to go is to go to bregmanpartners.com, BREGMAN partners, plural.com. And everything's there. You go to the resources tab and go to books, and you can find the book there. Or there's a link, there's a quiz on the site about you know, how effective we are at changing other people, and you can find out everything there.
Fantastic. Peter and Howie, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure and honor to have you here today.
Thanks. It's really been great being with you.
Yeah, thanks for a beautiful conversation, John.
My pleasure.